closer. Happy Gaudete Sunday, the day where the church in the middle of Advent gives us this beautiful day to really focus our hearts and minds on the joy of the Lord's presence, the way that He's come in history in the incarnation in Mary's womb. Just a little pause in the middle of somewhat of our penance as we prepare for the Lord. Just a reminder that Advent, just like Lent, is a penitential season. Lent is obviously more penitential in a different way, but Advent's still a time of penance, a time of kind of focusing and preparing our hearts for the grace of Christmas. It's little sacrifices and things that we give up to really prepare our minds and hearts for that special grace. So we don't want to miss that grace. We don't want to miss the hour of the Lord's visitation. And penance is a beautiful thing. It's a word that we should recapture in our Catholic faith. It's, penance ought to bring greater love and joy. And joy flows from the love in our heart that we feel for God and for others. So it's not a mourning, but a penance that awakens us even more to a stronger desire for the Lord. Anyway, today we begin with the theme of Veronica, who's that most beautiful person in sacred history, who comes with her veil to wipe the face of Jesus. And it was a custom in the day. Father Carney points out that veils were often used by women to help to wipe their guests, or to lend to the guests to remove their sweat and from their travels. And so here's Veronica making her way through the crowd above all the jeering and the shame to get to Christ. And she stands out and she wipes Christ's face with his blood, and his blood is imprinted on this veil. And we know that we still have this relic in the church. It's a very, very beautiful relic. And so this veil of the Lord, it actually kind of reflects in her name, Veronica. It was like she was chosen and she was named for this very person. Veronica in the Latin is like Veronica. It's like true icon. She herself, no doubt, as that face of Christ was imprinted on her veil, I would say that those eyes of Jesus in that moment of compassion that she showed him and feeling his love, no doubt that image was imprinted on her soul. And, as we meditate on the holy face of the Lord, his face will be more imprinted in our hearts, in our soul. And it is most incredible of graces to be able to console the face of Christ like Veronica. Today now, we're speaking about a theme as we continue to speak about the unitive way. Transluminous obscurity. What is that? But it's a term to try and explain what happens to souls when they reach the unitive stage. And it's like the idea that there is a sort of maybe felt darkness. We spoke a little bit about that yesterday, kind of a feeling of the absence of God, a feeling of where are you, Lord, a feeling of one's unworthiness. We didn't speak so much about that yesterday, but what starts to happen in unitive stages is the soul becomes more and more convinced of how unworthy they are of the great holiness and love and purity of the Lord. One sees in themselves, their nothingness, their sins become more magnified. And so in this stage, as one becomes so aware of one's unworthiness, one needs greater acts of faith, hope, and love in the mercy and the goodness of God, that one has to really persevere in trusting God's goodness, because in the midst of this deep purifying trial, one could be tempted to dislike God, to turn from God. And so only heroic souls experiencing the unitive stage, and therefore these final touches of purification, will be able to persevere in the goodness of God. Now, this is not some kind of game God is playing with us, but He's extending his light so deeply into our hearts. The saints tell us that it's so bright that it feels dark in that sense. And it's just a stage that the soul is going through to then actually come to a more felt, purer light in one's soul. And so this obscurity, it's called transluminous obscurity, because in some sense, God's breaking into the soul. He's coming so close that he seems even more obscure. And this is why one can feel in the unitive stage, in this part of the spiritual life, that one is going backwards in their spiritual life, backsliding, as if, you know, they're no longer enjoying the graces maybe they have seen of their union with God. They could feel like they're going away further from God, and yet God's breaking more deeply into the soul more. And so analogies of the Spirit saints have used, like John of the Cross, is like a wood. You know, you throw wood in the fire. First it starts to burn, and it starts to go black and ugly and like smut, and then eventually it's transformed into flame. And so it's the same thing with this kind of spiritual life, this experience of the incoming of God. And, you know, this sense of unworthiness is in view of understanding the pure light of God, which is coming into the soul, which the soul may not always appreciate in the moment that is in it. When the soul's in it, no matter what you say to the soul to console it, they're just not, they could even be tempted to convince God has forgotten them, not loves them, as we mentioned. So often, you know, it depends on the circumstances. Now, if somebody's in sin and conscious a lot of sin, they could still feel like this too, but that's because of their sin. This is a different experience. This is to do with just really the inbreaking of God's light. Another example is like St. John of the Cross. Like if you have a glass and there's dirt on the glass, as soon as the light shines on the glass, you just see all the dirt. So it can happen as we get closer to God, we become way more aware of our sin. The opposite is true, is that people who are lukewarm or not conscious of sin, let's say if they've gone for months and they go to confession, they say, Father, I don't really know what I've done. Well, that conscience is probably dead. It's not really awake. It doesn't have a sense of the holiness of God and a sense of sin, or is not catechized to understand the moral path. And so